Now, after the release of several photos of the deceased sex offender Jeffrey Epstein with several high-profile figures by the U.S. House Oversight Committee, the Justice Department has started publishing the complete list of files on Epstein. The U.S. Justice Department has published over 300,000 pages of records from its probe into the late financier and sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. Now, this includes 7 pages listing 254 masseuses with their names completely blacked out. The disclosure of the documents also added that the names have been redacted to protect potential victim information. However, it warned that some names could be disclosed inadvertently. The released documents also contain dozens of censored and face-redacted images depicting partial nudity. It also includes a page with a message that reads, "I have a female for him." Now, furthermore, the latest trove of documents also show former U.S. President Bill Clinton reclining in a jacuzzi, while in another photo, Clinton could be seen swimming alongside Epstein's aide, Ghislaine Maxwell. Other photos include a portrait of Bill Clinton dressed in a gown and a picture of Rolling Stones co-founder Mick Jagger. The Epstein files also contain pictures of the King of Pop Michael Jackson and Duchess of York Sarah Frickson and Diana Ross. However, being named or pictured in the files is not an indication of any wrongdoing. Many identified have denied any wrongdoing in relation to Epstein. Now, following this, U.S. Deputy Attorney General Todd Blanche, in a letter to the Congress, said that the Justice Department has released hundreds of thousands of pages in connection with Jeffrey Epstein. He also said that more than 1,200 names have been identified as victims. Blanche added that more documents will be released in the coming weeks after review. Now, in response to this, Democrat and member of House Oversight Committee Robert Garcia said that the Department of Justice has only released some of the documents from the Epstein files, adding that it is not a full release. Other Democrats have also criticized the release of the Epstein files, calling it incomplete and heavily redacted.
First of all, the law requires all unclassified documents related to Epstein to be released. It's obvious they have not met that standard. Blanchard himself admitted that they only are releasing a few 100,000 documents, and the rest of the documents they will be releasing in the weeks ahead. It is disappointing that they haven't been able to release these documents on time in compliance with the law. The second thing is that some of the documents, I've just been scanning them, have very heavy redactions.
While the latest release of pictures continue to show Epstein's connections with some of the most powerful people in the world, a criminal defense attorney has argued that prominent personalities seen alongside Epstein would have been prosecuted already if they committed any wrongdoing.
What have we learned so far? Well, yeah, there were famous people who thought it was cool to hang out with Jeffrey Epstein. That's not a crime. Yes, sometimes we all take pictures, and boy, I really wish I hadn't done that. But it may be embarrassing, but it is not a crime to be photographed with Jeffrey Epstein or in a room with Jeffrey Epstein. So much, billions and zillions of documents are out there. I mean, by the time everybody gets through this, President Trump won't even be in office anymore.
And to discuss more, we're now being joined by Stephen Golub from Boston. He's joining us from Boston. He's a political analyst and a lawyer. Thank you so much. Appreciate you joining us on the broadcast. Now, these files have been released, and I'm guessing you might have also gone through these documents that have been released. If you could help us understand what stood out for you, or whether redacted or not, in these documents.
Well, what stood out is what hasn't been released in terms of what's been so heavily redacted, as your excellent introduction noted. Just by virtue of a brief introduction or background for viewers, number one, Jeffrey Epstein, as your introduction noted, was a pet or suggested was a pedophile. There's abundant evidence indicating he was a pedophile who abused or trafficked in hundreds of young women, many of them under the age of 18. Number two, Donald Trump was a big buddy of his for years and years. They called each other several times a week. They went to a number of parties where a number of young women were present. Sometimes they were even among the few or only males at those parties. And number three, since he's been president, one of Epstein's co-conspirators, or the only person who's been convicted since he committed suicide or supposedly committed suicide in federal jail, a woman named Ghislaine Maxwell, who was his partner in crime, has been moved from a Florida jail to a Texas minimum security jail where she's getting much better treatment. And Trump has spoken about her, this convicted sexual predator, in very kind terms, which is contrary to how he usually talks about criminals or even alleged or accused criminals. So that's the background. The redactions indicate that much of the information hasn't come out yet. The Justice Department itself has admitted that in apparent violation of the actual law, it hasn't released all the files. So there's a lot more to be seen. And one more thing to keep in mind is that the interest in this is not just a matter of the Democrats or political opponents being interested in these files of the sexual predator linked to Trump and maybe to people across the political spectrum, but also people within Trump's own base are upset about this because for years they've been convinced that there's a conspiracy here. Trump was actually fueling that interest on the part of his supporters until he became president, when he turned around and tried to suppress these files. So there's a lot of balls in the air. We'll see what happens, but the release of these files is really the beginning of the next chapter, by no means the end of this story.
What about transparency? Because you named Donald Trump. Now, Department of Justice is part of this. When it comes to transparency in this case, how much do you trust transparency we might be expecting from these documents?
Less than zero, to be frank. Initially his Secretary of Justice, the Attorney General, the head of the Justice Department, Pam Bondi, said she had a list of people who were Jeffrey Epstein's clients. She had all these files to disclose. She backtracked on that several months ago. And the fact that Bill Clinton is featured in some of these files much more than Donald Trump is, even though Donald Trump for years, for a decade or more, was maybe even Jeffrey Epstein's best friend. They certainly palled around a lot together, indicates that what's being released is being very selectively chosen. What's being redacted, maybe to protect Trump, is being very selectively chosen. So you can't really have much confidence in what the Department of Justice is doing these days. Now, having said that, I just want to add one thing. It is very possible that people across the political spectrum, regardless of whether Republicans or Democrats or some very influential, very wealthy people, could be implicated in Epstein's crimes if all the information fully comes out. So I don't want to make this simply about Trump, but because it's Trump's Justice Department, and Trump was Epstein's very good friend, maybe even best friend for a number of years while Epstein's crimes were going on, raises some serious suspicion of what's going on when the Department of Justice releases files that seem to minimize Trump's involvement.
Well, and you mentioned, of course, since you mentioned like Donald Trump, and there are big personalities that we see in these images. What consequences can it have on them? Because, of course, the images don't prove that they have done anything wrong. But what might we know about just the whole political spectrum? You just said that it's not just about just Democrats and Republicans, because we see both sides in these pictures. Will that somehow influence what comes out of this case, and what happens to the victims then?
Well, yeah, those are a couple of very good questions. Right now, it's mainly a political matter in terms of what is and isn't being released. In terms of what comes out down the line, we'll have to see. I don't want to sound conspiratorial. Usually, I'm of the incompetence theory of history. People messed up. They are not intentionally hiding information. They just messed up. But in this case, so many people were such good buddies with Epstein and associated with him, and Epstein was so involved with such heavy trafficking of sex trafficking, as well as his own personal abuse, that there seems to be more here to be found out. Whether we will find it out is another matter. Whether these files really include such incriminating information that other people could be charged for various kinds of crimes. But we do know he was involved with sex trafficking. It's noteworthy that so far, none of the people he supposedly trafficked these young women, many of them underage to, have yet been revealed or brought to justice. Whether they will be, we'll see, but it's something that I think will be a big story in days and weeks and months to come. If I could add just one more element to this, don't be surprised if Trump, via an attack on Venezuela, other attempts to change the story, tries to prioritize other stories to dominate the headlines, such that Epstein fades a bit from being the prominent story. Don't be surprised if that wag the tail scenario, as it's called, could come to pass as an effort to suppress or distract people from this very interesting and sad story.
And that being said, it's not just US. We have some UK royals also named in this. Last week, London police decided not to open a criminal investigation into new allegations against former Prince Andrew. But looking at these photos now, what does it mean for not just, the people in the photos, not just Trump, but also for former Prince now?
For former what? I'm sorry.
Former Prince Andrew. Because last time we heard that he was the last week, London police, they decided not to open a criminal investigation on them.
Well, it could mean two things. One is that politics is playing a role in legal decisions in the US and in the UK and maybe beyond because of all the influential personalities involved. But in fairness to all those personalities, even though I'm sounding pretty accusatory or suspicious, we just don't have proof yet in terms of what's come out, or we don't have definite proof that they should be prosecuted. Prince Andrew may be a bit of a special case in that there was a woman who specifically accused him of abusing her, I believe when she was underage. Unfortunately, she apparently committed suicide. But for the most part, be it Prince Andrew or others, as suspicious as this whole sordid mess is, for the most part, we don't yet have sufficient basis for actually prosecuting people. Now, whether our Department of Justice or the equivalent in the UK or others other places will pursue these matters, given the personalities potentially involved, remains to be seen. It wouldn't shock me if they abstain from pursuing it.
Interesting. Now, also, looking at the process right now, if you could make us understand, if these files are released, and it'll take months, of course, what happens next?
Well, just to push back just a little bit against what you said, these files should not be taking months to be released. They've had these files for months and months and months under the Trump Justice Department. They had 30 days to release them, and now the release has been, by their own admission, incomplete and heavily redacted. What I think will happen next is that there'll be pressure. Maybe initially there'll be a focus on Clinton because he seems to be a focus of the released files, or the most prominent focus. But over time, by which I mean days or weeks to come, there'll be pressure not just from Democrats, but at least from parts of Trump's base. A woman named Marjorie Taylor Greene, for example, who in some ways, frankly, is a wacko as a politician. She recently stepped down from Congress, but has distanced herself from Trump and is now going after him about various matters, I believe, including the Epstein files. So parts of Trump's own base, not the majority necessarily, but segments of it, will be very suspicious over why all the information isn't coming out, and they'll be anxious and pushing him or pushing his Justice Department to release more files as soon as possible, even if this does stretch out over months. And as more information comes out or appears to be concealed, this thing will continue to bubble on. It's not going away anytime soon.
But then you also talked about redacting, right? Well, we have some comments coming from the Justice Department. It's not just about concealing information, but they have said that, they're consistent with the statute and the applicable laws. We're not redacting the names of individuals or politicians unless they are a victim, which is, of course, just because they're in the photograph does not mean there's some criminality going on. So what do you say on that? Because they have stated that they're not doing this on purpose, but it's applicable by law.
Well, I think that's a good question and actually a fair point. But it seems as though so much has been redacted that we're not just talking about victims' names or identifying information. There could well be other information that should legitimately be released that's being covered up, or covered up maybe for the moment slightly too strong a word, but should be released under the law but isn't being released. I believe the law also requires that the reasons for redaction must be made clear to Congress, and we're waiting for that to happen. Look, the bottom line, though, is that you've got a good buddy of Donald Trump and maybe of many other wealthy and influential people who seems clear was involved with very sordid activities, including trafficking, for which no one but one associate has yet been jailed. And the Department of Justice is basically slow walking the release of files, and including the redaction of files that by law it was required to fully make available to Congress and the public by today. And it hasn't done so.
Okay. Well, of course, what they replied saying was, of course, these are victims' names that they wanted to redact applicable by law. Of course, we'll have to see and watch what happens next. But thank you so much for joining us on the broadcast and giving your perspective.
Thanks for having me.